Hi again, everybody, and welcome to the online version of Journalism 101, Critical Analysis of the Mass Media, here at UNLV. I'm your course instructor, Dr. Paul Trout. Welcome to the second from last module in the semester. This week we talk about, and you will read about, a subject very dear to my heart, and that's mass media theory and research. There are component parts of this chapter you will read that we spend entire semesters talking about. And certainly we offer 400 level courses in the social impact of the mass media, and a good deal of what we do in the graduate program, for those of you who at some point might be interested in going on and looking at that type of thing, we spend entire semesters devoted to these subjects as well. So this content this week is about media theory and research, and you'll read about how media theory has been used to address all parts of media, from media writing to emerging technologies like text messaging. So let's move forward and talk for 10 or 15 minutes about some of this material. Many of the ideas in this chapter can be grouped around the idea of theory and research. I believe it was about the time I was an undergraduate student, like many of you, that I learned from a professor of media studies or communication theory that there was nothing as practical as a good theory. And certainly within your course of study thus far as undergraduate students, you have encountered theories in sociology, in communication, in psychology that just seem to fit, that do a wonderful job of explaining complex processes for us. Theories like cognitive dissonance, or theories of the functionality of certain elements in society, things that help hold the glue together. So a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today has high practical value. In fact, a lot of what we're going to talk about and ways that I approach theory in my own teaching at the 400 level, for example, is to talk about how most theory revolves around what we might call the triad of media studies. And that triad is composed of three elements. And if you think about that triad, it might help you organize your thinking and study of the material in this chapter. And the elements of that triad are as follows. You start, of course, with media institutions. And you have studied all semester now in 101 media institutions, how they've come to be, who works in those institutions, what regulatory and legal elements are impacting those institutions. Where are they going as a function of the impact of technology, evolving technologies in the digital realm? What are the employment trends in that industry? And those industries, whether they're print or electronic or internet-based, produce content, some for profit, but produce content that is designed to appeal, to inform, to entertain. And of course, the third element of that triad is the audience. Now, many of us who are scholars in media studies work within one or more of those realms. I, for example, work within the area of the relationship between content and audiences and how they use that content in terms of everyday communication. So keep in mind throughout your studies in our program where all this fits in for you in terms of the triad that represents media studies. The other thing that I would have you consider is why it's important to think about theory and how applicable it really is in terms of your career goals. Research impacts all jobs in traditional and emerging media industries, folks. You will read in this chapter theories about news, theories about entertainment, theories about media and society, theories about uses and gratifications. Now, all these theories have practical elements that advertisers, that journalists, that other people who are in the business of persuading and creating content that ultimately will attract audiences to that network, to that station, to that print or electronic vehicle. Because as we've discussed all along this semester, so much of what happens, particularly in Western cultures, in terms of media institutions, is the profitability of the messages that they promulgate. You can't make money in this business unless what you create in the way of content is appealing to a large enough audience who are willing to pay for that content directly through subscription or indirectly through things like advertising. So all of you should be interested in media theory and research because it impacts all the jobs, directly or indirectly, in traditional and emerging media technologies. I often encourage my students to think about a research role if they want to go into integrated marketing communication, or a research role if they want to go into the business of film, or a research role if they want to go into the business of journalism or promotion or any other aspect of the advertising industry. Because you don't have to be a quantitative scholar. You don't have to be a statistician. But if you understand what kinds of needs you have in terms of your information society, then you can certainly hire some of the best people, the brightest minds to do that research for you. But research plays a fundamental role in terms of answering key questions today. No one creates a television program. No one creates an advertising message. No one mounts a large nonprofit organization communications campaign without first starting with research. You're students of media, and you should embrace the opportunities to learn as much about that type of thing as possible. You'll make yourselves extremely marketable if you do. You'll also read in this chapter how research generally falls under two different types of methodology, quantitative and qualitative. In brief, quantitative is the way that we end up quantifying people's responses or their behaviors to questions that we have. So survey research, as many of you have already figured out, many of the answers that we derive from surveys are reduced to numbers, and we count up those numbers and report out things like frequencies. So quantification is a huge part of social science research, which is a huge part of media research. Qualitative research, running the gamut from focus group interviews and advertising, where we sit down with a target audience and we have them explore over time their feelings and reactions to goods and services, and we pay careful attention to what they say and how they say it, and we end up using their words for future research that might be quantified research, quantification research, or we use their words and their phrases in actual advertising copy or in future strategic campaigns. Qualitative research involves a lot more than that, but more often than not, when we think of qualitative research in media studies, we're talking about focus groups. You'll be exposed to a host of theories in this particular chapter, and there are many, and we can spend weeks, and I do spend weeks talking about some of these in other classes. But let's just brush over a few of them and briefly orient you to what they are about, so that when you encounter them in these readings, you will recognize some of these. Cultivation analysis. Cultivation analysis, of course, comes from the Annenberg School of Communication, former Dean George Gerbner, and his ideas were found themselves methodologically both within the social scientific and the qualitative research realms, and he talked about how media messages were pervasive but very difficult to measure at times because so many people who consume a great deal of popular culture and popular media are within the cultural mainstream, and their values end up reflecting the values of the predominant images of women or of men or of organizations or of families and so on and so forth after years and years and years of exposure to things like situation comedies. Spiral of silence theory, about the propensity for individuals in the majority to not express their views for fear of reprisal from a vocal minority, often a media minority. And if you think about Nazi Germany and the role that propaganda played in their manipulation of the masses, you may understand a little bit more about where she's coming from. It's an interesting theory. Uses and gratifications. I've made mention of this, I believe, in a number of lectures. This is the idea coming from structural functionalism and sociology that media provide an important function that create the glue and hold parts of society together. And we know from this many decades old theory and perspective in our field that many people use media for common means and common reasons. Things like escape, entertainment, to stay on top of things in the world. It's called surveillance or news surveillance. For social affiliation, to expose themselves to things that they can then talk about with others. So you'll read about uses and gratifications that media offer up things that, upon their consumption, allow people to feel sated about their current state of mind, at least for a little while. You'll read about agenda setting, which is an extremely important and well-researched perspective in the area of journalism. And this is the idea that the news media are very, very good about telling us what's important to think about by setting the agendas through their gatekeeping and their coverage of stories during the day. More recent research in past decades has shown that not only are the news media effective in telling us what to think about, but because we limit ourselves so much to so few news sources today, and because all those news sources rely on the same original content coming from wire services or the New York Times, for example, that they are also effective in telling us what to think about in terms of those issues. It's kind of a scary notion. So you'll read about agenda setting. Political economy is not a theory unique to media studies. It's a widely held theoretical system that many types of scholars use. Political economy looks at what is at the base behind things like media institutions. And so a political economist looking at media studies will look at what are the underlying girders or supports holding up media institutions. And of course, in Western culture, it's all about profit. So political economists looking at media studies would look at things like the emphasis on advertising and how not just advertising messages, but all kinds of programming and content in traditional and emerging media emphasize things like the spending of discretionary income for conspicuous consumption purposes, maintaining the belief that you can't be happy unless you continue to consume things because it fuels this system that's so predicated on the idea of advertising. So those are some of the ideas that you'll be exposed to in this chapter. Again, we're out here to whet your appetite, and I hope some of you will find this material interesting because as you move on in as a major in our program, you will be taking research methods classes. We want many of you to understand that it's a powerful thing if you can do research, that you can help set the course of action in terms of how you solve communications problems for the organizations in which you work, that understanding theory has highly pragmatic and practical value, that being able to at least provide direction to how a survey gets done and be able to critically analyze the results that your employees or that consultants provide to you enhances the opportunities for you to be successful within this discipline. That's it. Enjoy this week, and I'll look forward to spending time with you when we discuss the last chapter in the semester. Thanks for watching.